Today we're joined by Steve Rae. Steve, can you just share who you are and what it is you do?
Yeah, Kenny. Well, I'm Steve Rae. What do? I do my best to try and influence companies' safety culture. I do that through my own limited company that I share responsibility with my wife. The company's called Fortitude, Action Beyond Compliance. We've been doing so for a couple of years now, and I don't market my services, but I've got a really crappy business plan for retirement, which is don't market and it'll eventually go away.
Right.
But every time I do a session or an event, typically I get flown away through,
Pick up more.
through referral.
Yeah.
So it's a really crappy retirement plan.
Well, fair enough.
But it's just about discipline.
And obviously health and safety is a massive part of your life, and we'll get to, obviously that's through the Piper Alpha and everything else, and we'll come to that. But you grew up in the kind of oil boom at Aberdeen in the 70s, I guess. So what was that like, and was oil and gas always going to be the thing for you?
So it's interesting. The first recollection I've got of oil and gas in Aberdeen was when my family, my four siblings and my parents and I were up in Nairn, and there was a jacket being towed out in, I'd say it was probably very early 70s. And I remember on the beach, I could have only been 10, 11 at the time, thinking, what's that thing going out there?
Yeah.
And even my dad wasn't very
I guess the whole of Aberdeen must have been thinking that.
My dad wasn't even that aware either, because he was in the building trades.
Yeah.
And that was my first thoughts of what oil and gas looked like. And by the time I got to being 18 years old, I could think of nothing else about from getting into the industry, because a lot of my buddies by that time were making good money.
Yeah. And what was school like for you?
So school for a tall lad is always a bit easier.
Yeah.
I think primary school, middle school, primary school, I went to primary school, it was the best time of my youth. We had a family connection. My auntie cleaned it, my dad maintained it. My siblings had been there.
Right.
So going in as the fourth out of five siblings, we already had a track record. And I just had the best of time. I mean, I was quite good at sports. I was very academic at times. And I just seemed to have a brilliant time at primary school. Northwood Academy was pretty tough school at the time. And hey, I was doing well.
Still easier for a big boy though.
Yeah, but there's always tougher, harder boys when you're up to secondary school, and you just got to know who they are. What really affected secondary school for me and brothers actually was, I'm going to say in 1976, February 1976, my father passed away suddenly. My older brother was just going into his GCSEs at the time, which was difficult for him. And I was just going into third year, which really impacted my focus in school.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we got through it with some pretty good qualifications. But for me, my father passing so young really tore away a lot of our teenage time, because we kind of thought, certainly my brothers, we've got two brothers.
What age was your dad?
My dad was only, let me think, he would have been 42 going turn in 43.
Oh, that's young.
Fit, healthy man.
And what was that? What was the cause?
He took a massive coronary.
Wow.
And one Saturday morning, and we were all in the house at the time. I will remember it till the day I pass.
Yeah. And
it was just such a huge impact on our entire family. It just changed things from what school, what careers we planned. And hey, we managed. My mother did a fantastic job of bringing the five of us up herself. And we all mucked in from a very early age.
Yeah.
We all contributed as best we could and give her as little
hassle as you could.
It was entirely possible.
Yeah. So you finished school, you became an elect tech.
I did.
So was it written in between, or was that your kind of first job?
No, it wasn't my first job. I was working, would have probably been 25 hours a week, some weeks, helping on construction sites, delivering milk, working in a bakery.
Was that to chip in?
It was just to generate pocket money for myself, so I didn't have to depend on my mum.
Yeah.
But also it was just the ethic we'd been brought up with.
Just work ethic.
Work ethic was good. And so I was getting up at 5 in the morning at weekends to go into the Sunblaze Bakery on Granite Hill Road. And I'd finish that, and then I'd go and deliver green finals in the evening, and I'd play my football in between.
Yeah.
I look at some of the buildings that we've got around town, like the town council's facility at Katie Brewster. I look at the new airport, it was new at the time. I look at St Fergus, I still fixed.
A lot of that.
As a 13-year-old, making brilliant money,
Yeah.
Pocket money, and watching those places, not knowing what they were going to do, just being created.
Yeah.
And I really learned a lot about working as part of a team and responsibility, because we'd get left as 13-year-olds and say, here's what you've got to do, we'll be back in an hour and a half. You need to get it done. It was just a fantastic education.
So moving into oil and gas, so obviously boom time around about that time for oil and gas here. And when I came up here, people always said, oh, in the 70s and 80s, basically people just walked into a pub and said, we need guys, and then everybody got a job, and it was very easy to get into oil and gas, which it isn't today. So how was it for you?
So I served a traditional apprenticeship as an electrical engineer stroke technician. And we actually worked in servicing trawlers mostly and paper mills.
Right.
So I wasn't really exposed to oil and gas until my boss at the time, Donald Williamson, had got wind of this new industry. It was developing very quickly and saw it as a business opportunity, and he started trying to get work from ConocoPhillips, etc.
Okay.
Which he was semi-successful at, but I just got the feeling at that time as my time was finishing, if you like, as I was moving from apprentice to journeyman, they weren't really
Sort of driven on it.
driven on it. And
No seeing the opportunity.
not really. No, I think they wanted to stick with traditional industries mostly. Certainly the other partner did. And I knew that as soon as my time was out in about 82, despite having worked there since I was 15, I just knew I had to go somewhere else. So I was going to get into oil and gas.
And what about your older siblings? Any of them in oil and gas?
Oh yeah, my brother served his time as a motor mechanic,
Yeah.
and before, literally, as soon as he was finished, he was doing homers and stuff like kids do when they're growing up for the extra pocket money. He got involved in the oil gas service business, making drill bits and big downhole tools.
Yeah.
And he eventually ended up with his own company in Norway. Had a very successful career in Norway. My younger brother went offshore, and my recommendations is a story about that we'll probably get to. And sister was in travel, so that was booming for
Oil and gas.
Oil and gas. And my older sister, Linda, ended up in, what would you call that, travel as well. She ended up working for British Airways.
Right.
Originally, she was not working for British Airways. She was working for a company called Allidair,
Right.
and her flight was Aberdeen Sunbury.
Yeah.
And she said that was an education.
All oil and gas. Yeah. So you can see even then,
Oh,
like,
it was family.
82, Aberdeen was pretty much everybody's job was tied to oil and gas,
Yeah.
which it obviously still is today, maybe a wee
To a
bit
degree,
less,
yeah.
and that's changing. But what was your first trip offshore like then?
So my first trip offshore was with a company called Kestrel Marine. I was a maintenance electrician looking after all the welding plants. We had a fabrication shop, huge fabrication shop, and they picked up some work.
An Aberdeen company.
They were a Dundee company, but they had a big shop in Point Law down in the harbour. And they picked up work on a semi-submersible. It was the Dundee King's North. I will always remember that. And so my first boots on an oil rig
Yeah.
was stepping off the quay at Peterhead onto the pontoons.
Right.
And my first appreciation of how different and dangerous it could be was I was one of the first guys, what was I been in that time, 20,
Yeah.
who opened the tanks on the pontoons and went inside. That they'd have been flooded all the time. And I remember going down the ladders, and there was about an inch of silt and mud
Yeah.
on the ladders. And my job as a 20-year-old at that time was to illuminate those tanks for welders to go in and grind and burn and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Such a interesting baptism for the oil and gas.
So that kind of fits in then, because people say oil and gas was like the Wild West in the 80s. So he's an example of that.
So hey, we rocked
Was it
up.
everywhere?
I couldn't say everywhere. I think what I would say is, I got the call on a Thursday and a Friday, maybe from my boss, saying you just need to go and put some temporary lighting in on a vessel that's coming out to Peterhead.
Yeah.
Get yourself some temporary lighting and some cable, and up you go.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. We literally did. Threw in the back of the pickup, got to Peterhead, and it was go, 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 go,
Okay.
go, go. And we didn't really do written risk assessments or anything. That was like, we weren't like Mayor Sparky.
This is obviously pre-Piper, and there's a
Piper, well, 82,
made a
pre-Piper.
big
It was really me going offshore as an offshore worker,
yeah.
you know, but I kind of felt then, wow, these things are.
What about like
Exciting.
getting on the chopper for the first time? Or
So my first, again, you know, I had a couple of almost false starts, Kenny, because the
Right.
second time I went offshore, I left a company in Aberdeen where I was an electrical engineer doing ad hoc work. And I remember it well. It was on the 28th of December. It would have been 83, maybe 84. And I decided to join a company called Western Oceanic. And they had a rig, the Pacesetter 1, that was sitting in Invergordon getting ready to go out. And I was told by a good friend of mine who was a mechanic on there, you make a great Sparky. Just get yourself up there. And once we get out, it becomes, I'll just have to get getting out to work. And I remember going up to Invergordon by train. No, actually, I went up by bus with the crew. And I think the first 2 days, I transferred my boat out to the rig, and it was absolutely chaos. There was more people than there was beds.
Right, okay.
I was, by the time, naive as I was, by the time I finished doing what I was doing, I got to the galley, most of the food was gone.
Right.
There was no standard PPE for you to collect, supposed to bring your own. It was just a nightmare.
Seriously.
And all the things I was asked to go and check out, I could think of the drilling, the heave compensators, they'd just been painted. Everything was wet with paint in the middle of December, end of December. And I did it for 2 nights. And I just decided, this is not for me. And it was on the 31st of December, Hogmanay, if you like. And I was like, I can't do this.
Need to get home.
I went home and I went up to the American tool push and I said, look, I just need to get off. And he went, it gets better. I said, no, I just need to leave now. And he went, well, there's nothing. You can't get off. I said, you need to get me a boat now. And he did. He called the transit boat and I got into Invergordon about, gonna say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Pitch dark at that time of year. No plan. Got a bus to Inverness, got the train in, and the only thing I could think about coming in the train was, my mother's going to go crazy. She's going to go absolutely ballistic because I've quit my job.
And what was the sort of final straw then for?
Just I kept on getting electrical dunce, shocks off through the wet paint and the wet driving snow and all that. I just was like, I just can't do this. It's not getting any better, you know?
Yeah.
So I remember not telling anyone and wandering to that pub just next door, the Hayloft.
Yeah, your mother never said you've been.
No,
you're back 2 days.
They didn't know because I didn't go home. I just went straight to the boozer.
Right. Okay.
And I remember thinking, I'll face that in the morning. You know. And my first foot on that night was to my boss, Mike Crawford, who I just quit to go and work in the rig. And I went to first foot him in his house, knocked on the door, and his wife came in. She said, "Steve, is Mike?" And she said, "Aye. I thought you were on the rig." I said, "Well, that was a story."
Yeah.
And thankfully, Mike had sort of seen it coming.
Okay.
He'd worked offshore a lot of his life, and he said, "Steve," I haven't even told him yet. He said, "It's in the end of the year."
Straight back to work.
And I went back to work the next day, and so I could go home.
Yeah.
And that morning and say to my mum, "I've changed jobs, but I've got a job."
Yeah.
And that was for me was the most important thing.
So, what was the next opportunity then to go back offshore?
So when I joined, that company were pushing me offshore willingly, but the thing that was happening was I was ending up spending more time than not offshore, which was great to start with. He's made fantastic money.
Yeah.
I bought my own first flat in Aberdeen. And then I realised that my buddies that were working offshore were having a better time than me because they were on equal rotation.
Okay.
And I was like,
And you were just ad hoc as
ad hoc,
needed.
but more ad than hoc.
Yeah.
And I just decided I needed to get a proper job, proper offshore. And I left that company again for the second time. And I started as a contractor doing offshore maintenance.
Okay.
And I did that for a year before I ended up, that would have been 84.
So what rig were you on then? Or?
Oh, well, that's where I really gained a lot of experience because between working for Brown Boveri and doing my year and a half as a contractor, I must have visited 25 different installations. And that really allowed me to see how all the different operators worked, you know, from Marathon to BP to Shell to British Gas.
And was there good and bad at that time, or were they all pretty much in the same boat?
No, there were, the way I describe it is there was those that were really serious about it, and there was those that saw it as a thing they had to do.
Okay.
And there's those that were like, if it gets in the way, we'll do something about it.
Yeah.
And I will not name those companies, but that's when it became fairly clear to me there was no one offshore safety culture. It was like whatever went on that rig depended on who was running it.
But did the guys working on the rigs at that time even consider that? There'd never been a piper at that point. So was it even a thing, or was it just, well, this is where we work?
No. Hey, there'd been incidents, there'd been explosions, there'd been helicopters going down, Alexander Keelan happened. You know, so we talk about things in the tea shacks and at night, because we didn't go to our rooms at night.
Yeah.
We sat around the smoker room, or we watched a TV or a film, and we just talk about those things. So I heard a lot about things like that, you know, and I remember thinking, geez, we talk about it, and it really changes anything. And I really, looking back, I know at that time, I genuinely thought, if I'm going to be safe offshore, it's what I do.
Yeah.
I just need to make sure what I do is safe for me and for my buddies.
And we spoke to George Yule in this podcast as well, and he had mentioned the Piper Alpha, and we kind of really have a podcast with you talking about Piper Alpha. So, and he'd said he'd been on that asset a couple of times before that, and there was problems before that. It wasn't a surprise that such a thing happened.
Sadly, no. I mean, I'd been all over the Brents, the Forties, the Braes, Montreux. I've been on lots of different installations, but I'd never been on Occidental's installations and I'd never really heard much about it. But I realised from the day I went on, it was completely different.
How long were you on the Piper before?
Well, I left Alwyn, which I should have stayed in Alwyn if I had any sense, because that was a 30-year brand new field.
Yeah.
I could have been there all my career.
Yeah.
But I was offered.
What made you move? Was it money?
No, not money. So I was interested in things around that time. At that time, which would have been 87, I'd been on Alwyn since it was installed, which was 85. And people talked about a 30-year career.
Yeah.
I was in a maintenance core position, but they wouldn't take you on staff.
Yeah.
They wanted to keep you as contract. And I thought, I'm missing out on all the benefits you get with a staff company.
Okay.
Pension, medical cover and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, right, okay, if I'm going to do something, and oil price was terrible, $20 a barrel. It had been for, on average, most of the 80s. So I'd actually started to applying to go and immigrate to Australia.
Yeah.
I've got all my forms, I've filled it all in, and we've got folks over there. So I had sponsors, I got references from all my previous employers that were really glowing.
And what was the plan there? Be an electrician or there? Or?
I was going to work in a car plant, holding motors, I think it was, and I was pretty far down the pipeline. And the intention was I would just leave my offshore world and go. And then I was offered a staff job in December 88. And I was like, oh, do I really want to take a bad time in end of the year? I'm not a good end of the year kind of guy, right? And I decided I'd take it, and I joined Borden in January 1988. And the intention was to go to Beatrice, which I'd been on before, and I thought, that's a great job.
Yeah.
15 minutes in the helicopter.
Nice and easy.
Get rid of your biggest risk.
Yeah.
Know the rig, know the crew, it'll be great. So I went to Beatrice with Borden, fantastic company, and I did 3 trips. And then they said, hey, you're a really good spark. We need a spark for Piper. And I'm like, Piper?
Had you been on it before?
No, but I'd heard about it.
Okay.
And I'm like, And they said, you go there for 12 months, we'll put you somewhere else.
Yeah.
And by that time, you'll be a supervisor. And I'm like, right, okay.
Sounds good.
So I remember in April landing on Piper and thinking, oh my God, there are so many people on here doing different things. Because I couldn't make my mind up if it was a drilling rig, a production site, or a construction site. It was just absolutely swamped with people. And because of that...
So how many people were on that?
Well, I think there'd been, the full complement would have been 220 plus people living on it. But the Thalros was catering in 100 people that would come across every day.
How many were on the Alwyn?
On Alwyn, Alwyn was pretty busy. We had, because we had 2 rigs running at the time, but I'd say probably 130.
Okay.
So it was like
It's a double.
Double.
That. Oh, okay.
And because of the very nature of it, the way it was set up, the only people you really mixed with was your own crew.
Okay.
And the own crew were a great bunch of guys because they'd been together for a while.
Yeah.
So we worked safe, we had good processes, procedures. We just didn't have nothing to do with anyone else.
Yeah.
And that was part of the puzzle, right? You didn't know what was going on elsewhere.
Yeah.
On Piper. Yeah.
That was one of the issues.
Yeah. And I remember when I was getting transferred, I remember conversations I'd had on other rigs where people would be talking about, well, you know, if anything happens in the North Sea,
That's where it's happening.
no, what I'd heard was it'll happen on Claymore.
Okay.
And Claymore was a sister
Yeah.
platform of Piper.
And what was the problem with Claymore?
It was just the same. It was just way
Chaos.
on. It was chaos, you know. And I don't think they were the best built platforms either. Claymore was a bit newer, 2 years newer, I think. The Piper was, in my opinion, it was just such a rabbit warren. You could tell bits had been added, and it just felt completely disorganised.
Yeah. And then on that day, what happened on that day? Obviously, you can't tell because everything you've just said there, it was people stuck to the rain. But for your part, what happened on that day?
For us, it was. I always say, the 6th of July 1988 was just another day for us. We were drilling ahead. It was a brand new well. The rig was running really sweet, and it was my first day back on board. I came back on board that day, believe it or not. I was on nights, and even in the handover, it was rigs running really well.
Yeah.
It's going to be a quiet night. You might get your head down for a couple of hours. We'll see you in the morning.
Yeah.
And then it all just kicked
Went
off.
to shit.
So for us, it was a normal day.
Yeah.
And then it just, the first explosion, and then it just escalates so quickly. So scandalous.
How kind of time-wise? And where were you? Were you working? Were you
I
on
was
your
on the
bed,
drill.
or-
I was in the switch room at the back of the drill floor at Clockmill, 10 to 10 in the evening.
Yeah.
And it was 10 o'clock or thereabouts that the first explosion happened. And we were so removed from it. We were well above it on an A module. For us, it didn't even sound like an explosion. It felt like someone had dropped something really heavy on the rig,
Right.
and everything flew about the place, like tools and books. And I remember in switch rooms, there's rubber mats in every switch room offshore. And I just remember the dust and the debris coming about 12 inches off the mat.
Just coming up.
And thinking, my God, what's just happened, But at that time, it just wasn't an explosion for us.
Yeah.
I thought we'd been hit by a boat or we'd dropped something really heavy. And it wasn't till maybe 5 minutes after that, because we had a bit of a situation going on in the drill floor as a result of the first explosion. We lost all power to our drawworks, which is a big winch that hauls tools, right? And we'd lost all power. So those tools that were 100 foot above us were now hurtling towards us.
Wow.
And you can imagine, I'm the sparky, but all was out. And I remember the driller, Fred Busby, going, I just remember his face was just not panic, but just unbelievably surprised, shock. And thankfully, he was so experienced, Fred was so experienced, he managed to get the manual brake applied maybe with 15, 20 feet above the draw floor.
Yeah.
We'd have been wiped out.
Just by that alone. You wouldn't even have known about the disaster.
No, it would have just wiped us out probably. There were, I don't know, 6 of us maybe on the drill floor. Open drill floor. Tons and tons, tens of tons of tools above you, just heading south.
Yeah.
It was, so we thought we'd dodged a bullet. And then we realised I think it was almost collectively, we kind of went, wow. And we looked up, and if you look out the big door at the front of the drill floor, it's called the V door. It's a huge 30-foot high door where big equipment comes through. And I just remember you could see nothing except thick black smoke.
Right.
It was just as thick as anything.
So you didn't see any fire or anything at that
Nothing.
time?
Just, we couldn't see nothing for the thick black smoke. There was embers in it, which was a strange thing, and an eerie noise, a screeching noise. And our tool pusher, John Guttridge, came running through the smoke, like something that stars in your eyes, when they come through the smoke.
Yeah, he opened the door.
And we're like, what's going on? And his first instruction to us was, we're abandoning the rig right now.
Okay.
Because he'd seen it from a different angle.
Yeah.
And it just escalated so quick from there, some life-changing decisions, some unbelievable sights.
Yeah.
And hey, within 20 minutes, I found myself floating in the North Sea.
Yeah, so you jumped through, what, 70 feet? You jumped through the...
Eventually, we got to the 70-foot level, and we had no option. It was, we're gonna die.
And what was your decision there? Just fucking run and jump? Or
mine's, I was with in the derrickman. Our derrickman was Vince Wales, and Vince had been on Piper. And if you know anything about drilling, your derrickman travels the whole rig multiple times every day, so he knows every ladder, every stairway, every access way.
He knows where he's going.
So I was kind of lucky. Him and I ended up together on the drill floor for the second time. And our plan was to get as far away from the blasts as we could, but not towards the accommodation in the other direction, which you would think is insane, but there's reason behind that. And Vince was pretty animated. I was as cool and calm, as collected as I could be.
As you could be, yeah.
And Vince was ready to go immediately. He was like, no, we're going. And I'm like, that's a big decision. And, when I think about it, the way we dropped the hard hats on the gratings, we took our boots off because we knew they'd suck us under. Sparkies have always got tools in their pockets, right? They empty differing out their pockets, and we just stung down thinking, is this really what we need to do? And Vince, there was an explosion and Vince was gone. He was just gone. And I didn't know if he jumped or he'd fell or he'd been blown off. And I thought, right, I just need to do this. And it wasn't
was it just the two of you at that time?
Just the two of us. Mine was a pretty controlled jump. I remember the things I had to do from a survival.
Yeah.
Cross your arms, pin your arms, peg your nose off, and enter vertically. And thankfully, that's how I entered. But when you jump from 70 feet, you go in, and you don't know any idea how deep you're going.
Yeah.
But it feels like you're going to the bowels of the earth. You just think, oh my God, in your lungs.
Especially with everything else going on around
your lungs, the pressure on your lungs, and you just want to breathe. And it was just a terrible, brief, thankfully, that was fairly brief, a moment in time when you think, Jesus, what's going on?
And how long were you in the water?
I'd say I was probably in the water for 10, 15 minutes maybe, because it was so dark and eerie and smoky.
Yeah.
And everybody's focus in the supporting vessels, there was quite a few of them, they were all focused on the platform. We were in the water.
Yeah.
And how does a ship see in the water when it's all cloudy and murky and there's debris floating around, And I think I remember coming to the surface and that would have been at probably 22 minutes past exactly. Because in the timing is, when I came to the surface, what do you want to do? You want to take a breath and gather your bearings, but you also want to do a 15-second check that none's broken or bleeding.
Yeah.
And I was like, man.
But you must have been in panic and shock
I
anyway.
wasn't panicking. I was just like, I've dodged a bullet.
Yeah.
I'm going to be okay, but I just need to get out the water.
Yeah.
And then a second explosion happened, and that was, I've never been so terrified in my life. Because I heard it before I saw it, and it was just like a huge vroom.
Yeah.
And the shock wave, and I could see this cloud of gas coming right down towards where I was from the 70-foot level. And I'm thinking, it's not my night, I'm going to be burned. I'm going to be burned alive. So I went back under the water, and I stayed for as long as I could, probably 20, 30 seconds, I don't know. And when I came back up, there's a picture that I use in my presentations of the gas cloud igniting and rising very quickly. And that's what I saw.
And were you cold, or did that even?
And that's when the cold started to bite me below the water. You know, but above the water, I felt the radiant.
There's so much going on, yeah.
From the platform. So I wasn't, at that time, I didn't think I was that cold. But I knew I had to get as far away as I could. So I started swimming upstream because I knew everything was going downstream. And it was debris, burning fires on it. And then I looked up, and there was the Maersk logger, a big supply vessel, steaming right towards me. And I thought,
they're not going to see me.
I'm going under this. I'm going under this. I'm done.
Yeah.
And that was the fourth thing. In the space of 40 minutes, I was thinking of ties.
Yeah, a few different ways.
Yeah. And thankfully, they'd seen, I didn't know at the time, they'd seen Vince and I both jumping. And they were trying to get a downwind of us so they could break the wave splash to try and get to us. And eventually I didn't know Vince was on board, but eventually he threw some ropes out, and that's when I realised that hypothermia was setting in because I couldn't grab the rope.
Yeah.
My hands were just ineffective. And I was like, oh no, I'm starting to lose touch with reality here. And thankfully I managed to get the rope and wrap it around my body. And they dragged me into the side of the ship and up the scramble net.
And many people were on that boat when...
I think I was the second one that picked up. Vince, I didn't know Vince was on it. I started shouting, my buddy is in the water, and they're going, all right, get below, you're warmed up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, but just get down below. So they were helping me get the coverables off because I couldn't use my hands. And then when we got below decks and they pushed us into the shower to get us warmed up, Vince was already there.
Yeah.
It was a moment of,
because
I thought, wow, we're both alive.
Yeah.
How lucky is that? And then they started picking up some boys that were just, they weren't as lucky as us. They had life-changing injuries, and that was terrible. That was a terrible shit, yeah.
When did you realise that your life had changed due to that? Because it was obviously the following day, and everything else is very different than for pre-Piper.
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting. Well, I knew there'd been 2 explosions already, and I thought, geez, that platform's burning like a candle, you know, like a Bunsen burner. And then when I went to make a phone call on the ship, I was on the bridge, and I remember that was at the 2250, 10 to 11 at night when the third explosion happened, and that was the MCP-01 export riser, and it was like Hiroshima, but with gas.
Yeah.
And I realised then, oh my God, nobody's getting off. If I'm not off, well, you're not getting off. And then I thought, this has got to be a life-changing experience. And then it proved to be correct. By the time I got home that morning, I was classed as walking wounded when we transferred to Tharos, because that's where they were congregating all the folks. And we got to Tharos, and they said, look, have you got any major injuries? I'm like, no, I've got some grazes, I've got some burns, I'm warm now. And they said, right, we're going to put you in a temporary bed in the heli hangar, because the helicopter was up. And I remember the doors were open, and I remember listening to Piper groaning and creaking and moaning and explosions, and just watching bits of it slide in off. And I'm thinking, how is MD going to survive that?
Yeah.
And that's when I was in the last helicopter off of, I say the last helicopter, the last one with survivors on Tharos, because we were walking wounded. And the thing I'll always remember as well is we flew in over Aberdeen, which we'd done 100 times or more, but we came in almost at Aberdeen Beach and went right up Hutchins Street, which is on the way to the Horse the Hill, and we were really low, and it was summer, so it was already daylight. And I remember landing, and there was a big group of people waiting to receive us. But most of us were walking because we were walking wounded.
Yeah.
And we had blankets and stuff. And I remember getting to the main doors at Aberdeen accident emergency, and there was already families congregating, you know, and press and
So
police.
in the days, obviously, there's no social media like there is now. So how were people aware of that? I mean, I'm guessing the company would get in touch with families, but to the wider public, would they have been aware of that disaster, or would it have took a while?
I think so. When I was on the vessel, the Maersk Logger, I kind of realised that this was so big it would be on every news channel in the world.
Yeah.
And I thought, I need to be able to tell someone that I'm off
Yeah.
and I'm going to be home. So I asked the skipper on the ship, the Maersk Logger, I said to him, look, I just need to make a phone call. I knew my way about boats because I'd worked in them as an apprentice. And you can imagine, he was so preoccupied, he was like dismissive. He's like, away you go.
Yeah.
And I kind of insisted I needed to make a phone call. And thankfully, his second mate said to him, look, you'd want to do the same. So I was fortunate in that I made a call. And I think there must have been other people that were witnessing what was going on and made calls.
Yeah.
And by the time we got there, which would have been, 5 in the morning maybe, even the helicopters coming into Aberdeen, wakens people up, you know.
Yeah.
So by that time, there was quite a commotion outside of the accident emergency. And I remember, as I walked in, seeing a row of white coats, doctors and nurses just waiting to receive us. And that was comforting to see. But I remember them saying to us, they were doing site assessments, and they looked and they said, I remember this nurse saying to me, are you walking wounded? Or have you anything we need to take care of? And I was like, no, I'm walking wounded. I've got no lasting injuries. And she said, well, if you don't mind going in the waiting room, we'll come and collect you. We'll want to see those that are most seriously injured first.
Yeah.
And I realised I was on the last helicopter and there was no one else coming.
And injury-wise, what did you come off of that way?
I had I recall I had a mechanical problem with my knee. It wasn't serious. I was still able to walk and had some rope burns and some, what I would call minor flesh burns, but nothing that wasn't going to heal fairly quickly.
Yeah. And then you went back offshore, what, 6 months later?
Not exactly, no. My employer told me, once they received me and we were allowed to debrief and all the rest of it, they said, look, just go home, because my girlfriend at the time was 4 months pregnant. And they said, look, we don't want to see you till the baby's here and you need time to reflect on what's happened, and we'll worry about your future later.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until January 89, Sean, my oldest, arrived in December 88. And I had to go, I didn't have to, but I went in to see my employer and they said, well, what do you want to do? But what do you want to do, Steve? And I said, I don't know if I can work offshore.
Yeah.
I said, but I want to go offshore. I said, because that's a demon that will be with me all my life. I want to get in a helicopter and get offshore and see how I get on. So my boss, Norrie Weaver and Tom Whalen, arranged for a helicopter for the three of us to go out. And we went to Beatrice.
Yeah.
For me, which was a place of comfort for me because I knew it was 15 minutes. And I kind of knew when I put my feet on the deck that I could probably do this again. But circumstances...
What's that sort of emotion or feeling like going out and doing that? It's okay saying I want to do this and them arranging it, but that day you go and sit on the chopper again for the first time.
Well, yeah, but I think because I knew it was 15 minutes,
yeah,
and Beatrice is almost visible from the coastline,
yeah,
I was kind of comfortable I could manage that. And I've had a mantra most of my life, certainly since my dad passed, is if you feel the fear in something, but you need to do it, you best get it done.
Yeah.
And don't dwell on it. And I call it feel the fear and do it anyway. And I think that's what I knew I had to do. It was part of the healing process. I had to do it for this.
Yeah.
And I got a really good reception on Beatrice because lots of people, and you can imagine people were like, he's alive, he's here, he's doing well, you know, despite they'd lost a lot of colleagues because crews on Ballingrilla were still back and forth, and that was it, the tough part. So I kind of knew then, but I didn't actually go into a rotational position. When I came back from Beatrice.
So how long were you on that Beatrice trip?
That was in and out same day.
Okay.
And I came back in and they said, right, take stock, we'll see you in a couple of days. And what I'd been doing, unbeknown to the company, but I was effectively creating a backup plan. And during my time off,
Was that in case you couldn't do it?
Yeah. I'd always wanted to be an architect until such things as my dad passed and all that. Anyway, and AutoCAD was coming into the fore, was 89, right? And AutoCAD and all that was just booming.
Yeah.
So I went and took a computer-aided design course while I was off on a sick. And I got some really good marks and good training and good competence and all the rest of it. And I was thinking, okay, I've got a backup plan. So I went back into the office and they said to me, what are you thinking, Steve? And I said, well, I'll be honest, I don't know if offshore life is going to be the way I want to go. I said, but I'm glad I've done what I've done. I said, and I need to be completely honest with you. I've got a backup plan. I said, and I've been studying computer-aided design and I'm now pretty competent and proficient in it. So I have to really think about that. And they went, what, AutoCAD? And I said, yeah. And he goes, we've got a huge project kicking off. We're about to install a CAD system into our office. How do you fancy being responsible for it? And that's how I got into the engineering side.
Yeah.
So I ended up creating an engineering group. And I just went, board and drilling were fantastic to me. Well, they weren't as fantastic because they effectively were bought in 89 by Noble Drilling.
Right.
You imagine the impact on board and drilling from a liability.
Yeah.
Huge. So they effectively were going to go bankrupt if they didn't do. So Noble Drilling bought board and drilling in 89. And I, for whatever reason, hopefully not just because I'm a survivor, but because I showed promise, I was on a kind of, I wouldn't call it fast track, but I was on a development plan that I really didn't know I was on.
Yeah.
And I was really mentored by some amazing people through the organisation.
And what point then did health and safety become, I don't want to say a crusade, but become your kind of real focus? Because you went from electrical to new CAD to what you've been doing for the last.
Yeah, and so I'm quick to qualify to people that I'm not an HSE professional.
Yeah.
It's just something I genuinely believe in a lot. And Piper certainly impacted that hugely. But the thing that struck me was, and I did this some years ago now, but maybe 2 years after Piper, when I was reflecting on where I was and all the rest of it, because I had some personal stuff that was going on that wasn't ideal. And I went and I looked at the folder of all my Australian stuff because I thought, geez, that was my plan.
Yeah.
And that's gone now.
Yeah.
Because I could never immigrate having put my mum through that.
Yeah.
And having lost my dad and all that. I just couldn't go. So I kind of put that to the side, and I was reading through the references I got from employers thinking, am I going to be employable? And I thought these references were really good. And the one I got from a drilling company I worked for.
Why would you know being employable?
Because I genuinely thought that employers would think that anyone that had been through Piper and survived would be a
Mentally would struggle.
would mentally struggle. So I went through these letters, and I've got a few typed up letters, and the company I was working for in Alwyn were called Formac Drilling. And I've got a Formac Drilling headed page as a reference for the immigration. And it's typed out, signed by my supervisor at the time, and he's written on it, and this is in 87, in his handwriting. He was French, Alain Girard, I think his name was. He wrote on it, Steve is a really good worker, and he is not a safety threat to his colleagues. It was his broken English.
Yeah.
He is extremely conscientious, reliable, and looks after everyone else. And whether that was a sign or an unknown sign to me about my awareness around safety, or no, I'll never know. But I know that was pre-Piper, which was quite surprising for me. What really made me feel differently was I had developed an intolerance for people not doing a good job or cutting corners or not having a good work ethic, because I genuinely believe that a good work ethic delivers good safety. And I didn't really think about it at the time, but that's how I felt. And I carried that with me all through my working days till just now. So to get back on track, unfortunately, Borden Drilling disappeared in 1989. They were purchased by Noble Drilling as a result of the outcome of Piper. Borden found himself in a financially difficult place. Unfortunately, Noble Drilling bought them and they decided to keep me on. I must have showed some promise because I was on some form of development plan, which I never really knew about at the time. And through about a 10-year period, I ended up moving from engineering to special projects and going back to university, studying for a master's in business, on the understanding that as long as I passed that, I would continue to develop with the company. So that's what I did. And eventually, this is where my real, I would call it my real involvement in safety became obvious to me. When I moved into the operational side of the business, I became a drilling superintendent for a drilling operation in the North Sea. And that's when I really had influence over drill crews and contracts and so on and so forth. And that's when I really started to be more involved in safety from a very proactive approach. And I think that has stood with me ever since. But it wasn't always obvious to everyone else, because as a result of that involvement at operational level, I became involved in things like the IEDC drilling community. I became involved in Step Change and Safety's leadership team. And that's when I really started to, I think, show influence in safety. And I'll give you an example of how that looked to me and how it looked to others. I'd done a pretty good job at concealing my involvement in Piper for the first 10 years post-Piper. And if you ask people that worked beside me, I guess, who are new to the company, or that some of the people that reported to me, they weren't necessarily aware that I was a Piper Alpha survivor. And that was the same in the Step Change and Safety leadership team. And it was coming up to the 20th anniversary of Piper Alpha, 2008. And one of my work colleagues, Chris Allen, who's the HSE manager at Total at the time, was with me in a Step Change meeting when we were talking about what could we do of significance to reflect on Piper Alpha and the passing of 20 years. And Chris had said, why don't we get Steve to do a talk? And a couple in the room, man, I've been about 20 executives from main contractors, operators, who were all involved in Step Change and Safety. A few of those had said, well, why would we get Steve to do a talk? And Chris turned around and said, well, because you do know Steve's a survivor of Piper Alpha. And in fact, if his involvement in Step Change and Safety has a big bearing on what we possibly could do for Piper Alpha's 20th anniversary. And some of the individuals in that room who were very senior in our industry were almost taken aback or shocked to find out that I was a survivor. But for others, they commented that it made perfect sense because they'd known of me and heard of me and worked with me, and realised that that's why he's so passionate around safety and keeping people safe offshore. So that's when I really felt that I had influence, and that just continued as my career continued to evolve through to General Manager, Operations Manager and MD for Noble Drilling's platform business.
You see, try sort of hide the Piper Alpha side to get work. Had you seen that affect other people?
That's an interesting question you raised there, Kenny, about people's ability to deal with or feel comfortable about being involved in Piper. I've seen firsthand through my involvement with the Pound for Piper Trust, where people have not been able to go to the memorial services up to now, up to 35, 36 years after the event, because they just couldn't bring themselves to be in the company of others who had grieved, etc., etc. And I know that's a real thing. I mean, I class myself as very fortunate that I dealt with my grief differently. I never openly grieved, although I grieved internally. I dealt with it quite well. Post-Piper, in fact, the weeks, not months, but weeks after Piper, there was an organisation created in Aberdeen called Piper Outreach, and it was created by two social workers, David and Anne. And they were given premises in Justice Mill Lane, just up the road from where we are today. And they made it an open invitation to those that had survived and those that were bereft, had lost close friends or even next of kin, husbands, on Piper Alpha, to come along and just share their grief and their stories to try and help each other. And despite living very centrally, I just couldn't bring myself to go with that, because I was struggling to deal with my own internal grief, and I just didn't feel that that would help me in any way. Now, I remember getting the first call from David, and he'd called and he'd had my details from my employer, which I was fine with, and he'd said, "Hey Steve, it's David from Piper Outreach. I'm just phoning to see how you are, because we haven't heard from you. You've not been around." And I said, "David, I think I'm doing all right. I'm coping." I said, "and I'm just trying to get my life back in order." I said, but thanks for calling." And he said, "Well, listen, we're here if you need us. Just pop in by. We do it twice a week kind of thing." And then another couple of weeks passed, and I got a call from Anne, who was, I would say she was still empathetic, but she was far more direct. And she said, "Hey Steve, we still haven't heard or seen from you. We're just checking in with you to make sure everything's okay." And I'd said rather abruptly, because I didn't know her, "Well, I'm fine, or as fine as I can be. I'm just dealing with it." I said, and I think I'm progressing. And she said, well, I'm glad to hear you're doing well. She said, because many others aren't. She said, many are struggling to come to terms with the grief and the loss. She says, and perhaps you coming along would be of a great benefit to them, seeing how you're dealing with it. She said, because maybe that's what they need, is to see that others are not so affected. And I can't tell you how guilty I felt when I put down that phone, because I had been so focused on my own recovery and not having any concern for others that had lost a lot more friends than I had and a lot more work colleagues. So my guilt, I would say openly, my guilt almost obligated me to go along to the Piper Outreach meetings, and I did so with a bit of apprehension, I may say, and it was just as Benita described. It was a very grief-orientated session, grown men crying, grown men sitting in silence, not able to come to terms with it, and it felt extremely awkward, and it certainly wasn't for me. I knew it wasn't for me, but I thought it's best to go along. And I don't remember much about the 2 or 3 times I went along, but I know I bonded with one of the other Borden survivors at the time who'd had a fairly life-changing injury. He was struggling, and I thought it's the least I could do is to buddy up with him. And I did so for a couple of months, maybe even 4 or 5 months. I met his family, we talked a lot, we talked about our friends we'd lost. It was helpful for me, it was immensely helpful for him, I'm sure. But unfortunately that just petered away, and tragically Ian lost his life as a result of something else, which we won't go into today. And I think that for me really brought home how affected some people were. I mean, there was cases of people taking their own lives as a result of them surviving and their friends not. It was such a tragic time. And the other thing that really affected me and affected others as well was, you can imagine, the 167 lives lost. There's a multitude of funerals are going to happen. And initially it was just the services and funeral services of those that were recovered from the water and the seabed, which weren't many at the time. And I went along to some of those funerals, and I just found it was such an outpouring of grief. These were all vastly populated events in graveyards and crematoriums, young families grieving, wives lost a husband, children lost a father. It was very emotional, and it did affect me somewhat, but I managed to get through all that. And then come the recovery of the accommodation module from the North Sea months afterwards, there was another 81 bodies recovered. And that was another 81 funerals that you either chose to go to or you're not. And I didn't know everyone, and I certainly knew I couldn't go to every funeral, but I was going to make every effort to go to those that I knew closely, or those that worked for the same company as me. And I did so for a few, and then I got to one day when I went to Aberdeen crematorium up at Hazelhead, and I attended 3 services almost in succession. And that overwhelming grief really started to bite. And I remember going and sitting in my car after the 3rd one, thinking, I can't do this anymore. This is starting to really affect me. And selfish as it may seem, I chose at that moment not to go to other funerals. And I rationalised that in my own head by saying, what would they want of me if it were them that were here and I wasn't? I have to put myself first at some point and start my recovery. And that's why I stopped attending funerals, and it led to me eventually becoming involved in the Pound for Piper Trust, which was another interesting development. I'd been abroad for about nearly 9 years working abroad, and I came back, and I'm going to say I came back for the 30th service. I was doing something for the 30th service in Aberdeen, and the Pound for Piper, a trust that was created in 2013 for the 25th anniversary. The gardens and the memorial statue in Hazelhead Gardens had become a bit run down, and 3 very brave and courageous women, Carol Banks and 2 of her colleagues, had created the Pound for Piper Trust to raise funds for the redevelopment of the gardens and the refurbishment of the gardens. And they all worked in an offshore capacity, and they did a fantastic job at raising funds, pricking the conscience of companies that were involved, and they raised enough funds to refurbish and replant the entire gardens. And that was through the people offshore donating, through companies donating and selling merchandise, and that's what created the Pound for Piper Trust. So when I came back in 2018, I'd known Carol from days growing up. She grew up across the street from me in Hidderyfold in Aberdeen. And when I got talking to her, she said, Steve, it would be really good if you could consider being a trustee of the Memorial Trust. She said it would be really good for the trust. And I just felt compelled to do it because I just felt it was something I could give back to and help with. And eventually, a year and a half later, I became the chairman of the Plum for Piper Trust. And again, I tell you this because that's when I really started to see the effects still in place of grief on families, grandchildren that never even knew their grandfather would come to our services, which we started to have every year. Because I always felt that having them every 5 years or 10 years, it's not disrespectful, but it wasn't something that would be befitting people who have a loss every day. They suffer that loss and recognise that loss every day of their lives. So at least we could do it on an annual basis. So we still do those services on the 6th of July, every year since 1980. Well, since 1988 was when it happened, but since certainly I became chairman. And those services are still well attended. They're respectful. It gives an opportunity for those that are directly affected to come together. And that's when I noticed that some of the people that were coming up who were survivors were coming for the first time in 34, 35 years. And it was important that we were around for them because it was a big deal for them. So that's why we continue to do what we do and have a service every year, because we think it's important for those that still grieve the loss of a loved one. And I think that's where we got to with talking about, have I seen people being affected by Piper, not only in the work capacity, but in the home capacity.
Fair enough. And we'll end that part there with